Hi, Finbar, and thank you for your question. Look, I mean, what I can say at this point is that we cannot confirm or deny any allegations that Russia asked assistance from China. And while we take note of the 4th of February joint statement highlighting a clear rapprochement between China and Russia, we have absolutely no evidence that such request was made by China. But what I can say is that we are, of course, in all close contacts with the United States on all matters connected to the war in Ukraine, including the positioning on China.
Follow-up, Finbar.
Thanks, Nabila. Yeah, fair enough. But if it is the case, and we did have the Russian finance minister yesterday expressly saying that they were relying on Beijing to, at least economically, bail them out of these, the blow of sanctions. I mean, is this a cost-free exercise for China? And just if I may quickly, we have the Chinese and American top diplomats meeting in Rome as we speak. Are there any plans for EU officials to meet with Yang Jitsu when he's on European soil? Thanks.
On to your last question, I will have to check. For the moment, I have no information on this. On the second one, it's an if question, and obviously I will not speculate on if questions.
Thank you very much. Other questions on the situation in Ukraine? So I turn to Interactio. Please only keep your hand raised if your question relates to the situation in Ukraine. And I start with Erisa.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Eric. I have a question for you and Anna, actually. It's also related to sanctions against Russia, but, for Serbia. So we have seen that there are a group of members of the European Parliament sending a letter to the President of the European Commission and the High Representative asking for a temporary freeze of accession negotiations with Serbia as the country refuses to align with EU sanctions against Russia. And for the moment, this is the only European air corridor allowing, Russian citizens to go through Europe. So, can you confirm that you have received this letter from the European Parliament, and what the next step of the European Commission will be? And then I have a question on Ukraine, if you allow.
Thanks so much for the question, Elisa. No, I am afraid that I am not in a position to confirm that we have received the letter. I think that already last week we had ample opportunity to explain already that, as you know, that candidate countries like Serbia are, of course, expected to progressively align to EU's decisions and positions when it comes to foreign and security policy matters. And this is exactly where we are. You know that the EU has indeed been taking very strong measures. We are very clear that what we're seeing has been a blatant violation of international law. And again, yes, as candidate countries, countries like Serbia are expected to progressively align. And as regards to your questions on the airlines, I would just say that we continue to monitor the situation, and we have no further comments here.
Okay, Irisa, you had a second question on Ukraine. Go ahead.
Alors, ça, en fait, ça concerne la déclaration des chefs d'État et de gouvernement à Versailles concernant la demande de l'Ukraine de devenir un membre de l'Union européenne. Donc, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement invitent la Commission de donner son opinion, mais sans mentionner la base légale. Il n'y a pas de mention d'article. Donc, quel est l'article sur lequel la Commission, elle va justement faire son avis, son opinion. Et a sub-question to Anna is how inventive the European Commission can be to, present a questionnaire for a country in war like Ukraine. And what about the application for Moldova and Georgia? Thank you very much.
Anna.
Merci beaucoup pour la question, Risa. Donc, comme tu as bien dit, le Conseil a reçu la semaine passée des applications pour l'adhésion de l'Ukraine, mais aussi de la Moldavie et de la Géorgie, et a décidé d'inviter à la Commission à fournir des opinions. Comme vous savez très bien, le leader de l'Union européenne a endorsé. C'est ça comment on dit? Endossé cette décision dans la réunion informelle de leaders en Versailles la semaine passée. On comprend très bien l'importance de cette pas pour la population ukrainienne, pour le peuple ukrainien, mais aussi pour le peuple de la Moldavie et de la Géorgie qui souhaitent être part de l'Union européenne. Ils appartiennent à la famille européenne. Chaque pays, on l'a dit très souvent, ont le droit de décider son destin. Et ce qu'on peut dire aujourd'hui, c'est que la Commission va rapidement avancer avec le travail, bien sûr, merci Eric, sur les opinions, et on va rester engagé très de près avec le Conseil.
Merci. Je crois, Erissa, qu'il faut quand même accepter le fait que nous avons une déclaration des chefs d'État et de gouvernement qui date de vendredi, qui adresse une demande à la Commission européenne, et il n'est tout à fait naturel que la Commission européenne analyse cette demande. Nous allons travailler évidemment dur sur ces questions, mais il nous faut effectivement voir aussi comment le faire de la manière la plus appropriée dans le contexte très particulier que tu as toi-même évoqué. Alors, nous continuons. Je passe la parole à Jorge.
Hello, Eric. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
It's just a follow-up of what you just said, because I was also very interested in this application from Ukraine. I'm just wondering, this opinion that that now you're working on, are you going to use the to analyze what the country, how the country is, its institutions, its democracy level, its legislation? Are you going to use the state prior to the war or after the war? The circumstances, what kind of circumstances are you going to take into account? Because it's a moving situation. So are we going to have to wait until the war is over or somewhat resolved to read this opinion? Thank you.
No.
Thanks so much for the question. I think that, as Eric has just explained, we will now need to reflect how to best take this work forward on the opinions, in particular, as you rightly say, so when it comes to Ukraine, where we know that the absolute priority is to stop the Russian invasion, and of course to make sure that support can be delivered to the people inside Ukraine, but also to the people that, of course, are fleeing the war. So again, this is what we can say now. Also, I would just like to recall, as the President also explained herself in Versailles, that having a free and democratic Ukraine after the war will also require a lot of rebuilding of the country. This will be done with strong support by the European Union. So again, we will need to reflect how to best take this forward in this very exceptional circumstance that we find ourselves in.
Thank you. Okay, we continue with the situation in Ukraine. I move to Kasia. Kasia, please press speak.
Entendez déjà?
C'est bon, on t'entend, vas-y.
Oui. Kasia Szymańska de la radio RMF-FM. J'aimerais avoir un commentaire sur l'attaque russe à côté de la frontière de la Pologne à Jaworów. Je comprends, j'ai déjà, la réaction de Peter que c'est vous condamnez comme tous les attaques russes, inhumains, etc. Mais j'aimerais un peu avoir le commentaire sur le fait que ça s'est passé 20 km de la frontière de l'Union européenne.
Peter.
Merci, Kasia. Bon après-midi. Comme avec toutes les attaques dans le contexte de cette agression illégale de la partie de la Russie, nous condamnons très vraiment et fortement les attaques contre le centre de formation en Yavoriv. Et nous appelons à la Russie d'arrêter ces attaques et envoyer toutes les forces militaires de le territoire de l'Ukraine à la Russie. Donc, nous sommes très, très fermes dans notre position que nous condamnons cette attaque comme nous condamnons toutes les attaques qui sont conduites contre le territoire ukrainien.
Merci beaucoup, Peter. Je continue en Ukraine. Hein? You can, go ahead. Mose, you have to push the button and wait until it's red. And welcome back to the press. Okay. Wait until it's red. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I would like to move up from about the times. I would like to come back to say something which Anna mentioned in her reply, that about the need to rebuild Ukraine after the war, because we know that a lot of destruction of civilian infrastructure and so on. And if I'm not wrong, I think the Ukrainians themselves have estimated perhaps the cost to rebuild for the time being perhaps to 100 billion euro or dollar. So my question is about the sanctions, against Russia and its oligarchs. We know that it's a matter of freezing the assets abroad, but I wonder if the Commission also is considering if it's possible, legally speaking, to seize the assets, to use them to rebuild the infrastructure in Ukraine, because that will have to be done after the war is over, after ceasefire. And has the Commission itself started to, that's my second small question, started to calculate the cost for that? Thank you.
Mose, I think these questions are completely premature, with all due respect. We are in the middle of an atrocious war. The damage is accumulating day by day. The number of victims, alas, is increasing day by day, and the utter priority for the moment is to support Ukraine and its people in coping with this atrocious invasion. It is clear that there is a declaration of principle. It's a very strong principle on the part of the European Union that we will want to help Ukraine rebuild. But how that will be managed will entirely depend, of course, on how the war ends. And quite frankly, we are not in a position at this moment to assess this in any serious way, and we are certainly not going to start discussing here what are the options to finance a sum that we do not know the exact figure to put on, and will not be in a position to know until the fighting has actually ended. So I very much hope that we will be able to have this conversation very soon, but for the moment let us focus on the support that we are providing the country in its current fight against the Russian invasion. Okay, I think there are more questions actually for Anna. So Tanya, we come back to your question.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to Erisa's question. So she asked about the questionnaire, etc. So I understand that on Ukraine maybe it's difficult to answer, but for Moldova and Georgia, let's say, how do you plan to proceed? Will you proceed as you did with the previous enlargement countries? So will there be questionnaires and experts and on the ground? What's the situation like more technically? And also on Ukraine, at some point when the war ends, will the issue of the rights of the Russian-speaking minorities be taken into account by the Commission? Thank you.
Many thanks for the question, Tanya. I don't think that we can go further than what we said. I mean, we have a decision. We have the application submitted last week. We have decisions that have been endorsed by the EU leaders. We will now best reflect how to take the work forward. It is clear that the applications are in the 3 countries. We will see how to best manage going forward the situation, and this is what I can say for now. And as regards to the minorities questions, I am not in a position to go into too much details, but I think that you are very well accustomed, also, with the Article 2 of the values of the European Union, where very clearly, the respect and the protection of minorities is one of our most fundamental values in the EU, and I will leave it there.
Thank you very much. Okay, we continue the ballet of spokespeople on the podium. Jean-Pierre, une question pour Peter, je crois comprendre.
Oui, bonjour tout le monde, vous m'entendez?
Vas-y.
Bonjour Eric. Une question, il semble qu'il y ait un peu de flou, un peu d'imprécision sur ce qui a été annoncé, le doublement de la facilité de paix de 500 millions à 1 milliard, annoncé notamment par le haut représentant. Où en est-on exactement? Est-ce que les choses sont bel et bien ficelées pour ce milliard, ou est-ce que tout ça est encore en négociation et éventuellement négocié avec le partenaire américain? Et deuxièmement, sur une réponse de Peter tout à l'heure, est-ce que le bombardement évoqué par ma consoeur polonaise tout près de la frontière de son pays va entraîner une modification de la stratégie de l'Union européenne pour ce qui est de l'acheminement des armes? Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Sur ta deuxième question, n'oublions pas que l'Union européenne, en tant qu'institution, n'achemine aucune arme. L'Union européenne a mis en place un financement au titre de la facilité pour la paix qui permet de financer l'envoi d'armes et d'autres équipements non létaux à l'Ukraine, mais ce n'est pas l'Union européenne qui organise la logistique de ces mouvements. Donc je pense que c'est une question à laquelle nous ne sommes pas en mesure ici de répondre. Sur ta première question, je passe la parole à Nabila.
Oui, bonjour. Écoute, tout ce que je peux faire, c'est te répéter ce que le haut représentant a dit, c'est-à-dire qu'il avait proposé aux leaders justement qu'il y ait une contribution supplémentaire de 500 millions d'euros. Pour l'instant, ce qu'on peut dire, c'est que les discussions sont en cours cette semaine, des discussions techniques, et qu'il y a une volonté d'aller vite. À ce stade, c'est tout ce que je peux dire.
Merci Nabila. Je ne vois plus d'autres questions sur l'Ukraine, ni en salle, ni sur l'écran, et donc nous allons passer à d'autres sujets. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, one regarding sanctions, which is actually a question and a half, and another one regarding a bit of the Versailles that came out last week. Regarding sanctions, on Friday, the President sent out a statement in which she, and I quote, said that the EU will ban the export of any EU luxury goods from our countries to Russia. 2 questions on that. One is, does that include fur? Secondly, what constitute luxury goods in the Commission's terminology here? The second one is regarding the Versailles Treaty, and simply because part of the text says calls on the Commission to present options to address food prices and the issue of global food security as soon as possible, which has also been touched on by the Commissioner of Agriculture since. When does the Commission expect to put forward any kind of communication on the subject or any others proposals?
Thank you very much. On your first question related to the very specific issue of fur, as you know, the discussions are ongoing when it comes to the specifics of the sanctions package. So I invite you to wait until Council has adopted the sanctions, and then we will communicate on the specifics of the different product categories that are included in what we call luxury goods. On food prices, well, if you look at the liste des points prévus, which is our document which sets out the forthcoming agendas of the college, tentatively, I think it is foreseen for in 2 weeks. or next week already, sorry, 2 colleges I meant. So not this college, but next college. But of course, as usual, I would like to remind you of the caveat that our communication, or the agenda of the college is determined once the heads of cabinet have approved it. So you'll have to wait until we announce the actual college agenda next week. But tentatively speaking, it is foreseen for next week. And obviously this is an issue that is both urgent and important, and therefore we are working flat out to come up with our proposals on this. Okay, but those were Ukraine-related questions, to be honest. So, Mose, coming back to you on something else.
Okay, thank you, Eric. This is totally different questions. It has to do with the, let's say, Commission proposal on amendment of the directive on the protection environment through criminal law, which I think is in pipeline and will be presented to the Council this week and also then discussed by the European Parliament. And perhaps one of the main issues is if and how the concept of ecocide will be included or defined in that new directive. And if we will also, let's say, include, let's say, ecocide crimes committed not only in Europe, but also on other continents by European companies. So my question is if you could disclose something on that content in this directive. Thank you.
I think that you have asked that question around half a dozen times in various formats. I don't know if Adalbert has anything to say. He says no, so we will have to come back to you bilaterally on this. But I don't think we have anything to add to the previous responses that we have given to you, Jose. Okay, I move back to other issues. Kasha. Kasha, ta source micro n'est plus la bonne. Maintenant c'est bon.
Excusez-moi. J'ai encore une question sur l'aide humanitaire pour les réfugiés ukrainiens en Pologne. Est-ce que vous pouvez me dire, vous savez, il y a déjà 1,7 million personnes en Pologne. Est-ce qu'il y a un seul euro qui est arrivé au titre de l'aide humanitaire du budget commun? Est-ce que ces 500 millions dont a parlé la présidente est seulement pour l'Ukraine et Moldavie et pas pour les réfugiés qui sont en Pologne? Bien sûr, je ne parle pas de toute cette aide que vous avez déjà annoncée au titre de AMIF et tous les fonds de cohésion, etc., qui peuvent être utilisés, parce que ce sont des aides qui vont être utilisées dans les mois à venir, éventuellement les semaines à venir. Mais je parle déjà concrètement d'aide humanitaire. Et aussi, deuxième partie de cette question, ce mécanisme de protection civile, la Pologne l'a lancé la demande le 28 février. Et si j'ai bien vu, je parlais avec Balázs vendredi, il y a seulement 3 pays qui ont répondu. Je comprends que peut-être il y a plus d'aide que de ces 3 pays. Mais si c'est vrai, ça veut dire que ces pays de l'Union envoient cette aide en contournant Bruxelles. Alors quel est le sens de ce mécanisme si cette aide est envoyée directement? Merci.
Merci. Balázs.
Bonjour, Kacha. Il y a beaucoup de questions à clarifier, il se trouve. Donc, en ce qui concerne la somme de 500 millions d'euros que vous avez citée, effectivement, il s'agit ici d'une somme qui est destinée à l'Ukraine et, dans une moindre mesure, à la Moldavie, afin de soutenir de ce pays-là pour répondre aux conséquences humanitaires de la crise en cours. Évidemment, il s'agit d'un paquet plus large. Vous avez cité les fonds sous l'instrument AMIF. Anita va pouvoir vous apporter des précisions à cet égard dans un avenir proche. En ce qui concerne le mécanisme, donc la Pologne a activé le mécanisme il y a une semaine et demie pour demander plusieurs choses, y compris des dispositifs médicaux, des médicaments, de l'abri et aussi des vaccins pédiatriques. Donc à cet égard, on a vu jusqu'ici 4 pays qui ont répondu à la demande de la Pologne. Ce sont la France, l'Allemagne, le Danemark et plus récemment l'Autriche. Donc on voit qu'il y a quand même une réaction assez importante de la part des États membres et le travail continue. On a un centre de crise ici à la Commission qui travaille 24 heures sur 24 pour mobiliser davantage d'assistance. N'oublions pas aussi qu'il y a ce qu'on appelle un centre de distribution en Pologne qui nous aide à acheminer l'assistance vers l'Ukraine à travers les points de passage différents entre la Pologne et l'Ukraine. Encore une nouvelle que je voudrais partager avec vous. Hier, on a vu le déroulement d'une évacuation médicale de la Pologne vers l'Italie. Il s'agit ici de 3 enfants qui souffrent d'une maladie chronique et qui ont été accompagnés de leurs parents. Donc, encore une fois, un autre exemple pour montrer que les États membres, dans ce cas-là, l'Italie fait tout ce qu'ils peuvent pour, les Italiens font tout ce qu'ils peuvent pour aider les Polonais dans ces circonstances exceptionnelles.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Je vois qu'on est encore en fait sur l'Ukraine. Mosé, there are quite a few journalists who are asking for the floor. So, if you don't mind, I will give the floor to your colleagues. But Kasia, you seem to have a follow-up. Kasia.
Oui.
Kasia.
Alors j'ai bien compris que c'est tout ce que Balázs a dit est comme aide. Ça veut dire qu'il n'y a aucun euro pour l'instant qui est envoyé au titre d'aide humanitaire. Au moment qu'il y a 1 700 000 personnes, vous parlez de 3 enfants qui sont envoyés. Ça veut dire, vous savez, on me demande chaque jour quelle est l'aide de l'Union européenne. Et je ne sais pas dire. Ça veut dire, je ne peux pas dire qu'il y a 3 enfants, ça veut dire avec tout le respect, mais est-ce qu'il y a une aide humanitaire pour ce qui se passe actuellement en Pologne? Ou peut-être vous avez des idées de le faire, ou peut-être la Pologne n'a pas demandé, je ne sais pas, mais je peux vraiment pas comprendre ça depuis quelques jours.
Mais Kasia, je pense que je comprends tout à fait la question, mais il y a des besoins absolument partout. Mais les besoins les plus essentiels, les plus immédiats, les plus terribles, ils sont en Ukraine. Et c'est la vocation de l'aide humanitaire. L'aide humanitaire au sens strict du terme a vocation à aller dans les zones de grande détresse, de conflit notamment. Et donc, il est normal que les fonds au titre de l'aide humanitaire soient envoyés principalement en Ukraine. Bien. Ensuite, la Pologne, ainsi que d'autres États membres de l'Union européenne, vont pouvoir disposer de fonds au titre de différents programmes qui vont pouvoir être en quelque sorte alloués spécifiquement à des besoins liés à l'accueil des réfugiés. Et c'est notamment les 420 millions d'euros que tu as mentionnés toi-même, mais c'est aussi la possibilité de réorienter des fonds au titre de REACT-EU et au titre des fonds de cohésion. Les mécanismes pour ce faire sont différents. Ce n'est pas la Commission qui alloue une somme directement à l'État membre sur base d'un budget qu'elle contrôle. C'est les États membres qui peuvent regarder ce qu'il y a dans ces programmes dont ils vont pouvoir se servir pour financer ces dépenses. Donc je crois qu'il faut bien comprendre un petit peu la différence entre ces deux mécanismes. Mais au bout du compte, il y a des moyens disponibles pour la Pologne comme pour les autres États membres, afin de financer les dépenses auxquelles ces États membres vont devoir faire face ou font déjà face pour accueillir, comme ils le font, les réfugiés ukrainiens. Voilà ce qu'on peut dire aujourd'hui sur cette question. Virginie.
Oui. Bonjour. Vous m'entendez?
Oui. Oui.
Je voulais revenir sur le sommet de Versailles. Il y a eu plusieurs choses qui ont été demandées à la Commission. Et je voudrais un peu avoir l'agenda parce que j'ai pas les idées claires pour être réponse. Déjà sur l'énergie, il y a plein de sujets. Donc il y a comment faire face à la hausse des prix, question du marché de l'électricité, etc. Il y a la question de la baisse des dépendances de tiers. Ma question c'est quand est-ce que vous allez proposer, et la question de sortir de la dépendance du gaz russe en 2027. Et puis il y a aussi des choses sur la défense. Donc quand c'est vraiment l'agenda que je voudrais avoir. Quand est-ce que la Commission, vu d'aujourd'hui, je sais que ça peut bouger, mais compte présenter ces différentes propositions d'ici à fin mai, si j'ai bien compris.
On n'a pas fixé de date précise pour chacun de ces points. La présidente a dit dans sa déclaration aux médias que toute une série de propositions seraient faites d'ici la mi ou la fin mai. Et en ce qui concerne les mesures pour faire face aux hausses immédiates des prix de l'énergie d'ici la fin du mois de mars. Mais si tu me demandes des dates précises de présentation de nos propositions, je ne suis pas en mesure de te les présenter pour le moment. Comme tu le sais, on fixe souvent des agendas provisoires, en quelque sorte, enfin tentative comme on dit en anglais. Et ensuite, la Commission, au fur et à mesure, fixe des dates pour adoption par le collège de propositions spécifiques. Donc je t'invite à regarder notre liste des points prévus qui évolue de semaine en semaine et qui, au fur et à mesure, mettra à l'ordre du jour de collège à venir des propositions. Il ne faut pas oublier que le sommet a eu lieu jeudi et vendredi. Nous sommes lundi. Entre-temps, la Commission a continué à travailler sur la gestion de cette crise et notamment sur la mise en œuvre du quatrième paquet de sanctions. Et il faut donc nous laisser un petit peu de temps pour nous mettre en ordre de marche en ce qui concerne ces différents taskings qui nous sont venus du sommet. Karl, je vois que tu lèves ta main avec enthousiasme. J'imagine que c'est sur ce sujet.
Oui, c'est un follow-up. Je crois que Madame Vestager, demain à l'ECOFIN, présentera au ministre des Finances ces nouvelles règles sur les aides d'État, enfin en tout cas une modification du cadre des aides d'État. Est-ce qu'il y aura une communication publique à ce sujet? Et d'autre part, je sais bien que l'agenda des mois qui viennent est encore à définir, mais est-ce que tu peux confirmer qu'il y aura un texte sur le food security le 23 mars?
Alors, j'ai déjà répondu à la question sur food en disant que c'était à l'ordre du jour a priori du collège la semaine prochaine. Mais évidemment à confirmer par l'hebdo, comme toujours. Et sur ta première question, je passe la parole à Ariana.
Bonjour, merci. Pour clarifier, le 10 mars, donc je pense que c'est jeudi, on a adressé aux États membres une consultation pour un projet de proposition d'encadrement temporaire des crises en matière des aides d'État, en vue de soutenir l'économie de l'Union européenne dans le contexte de l'invasion de l'Ukraine par la Russie. Donc maintenant, on attend la réponse des États membres. Ils ont la possibilité de formuler des observations sur ces projets de la Commission et de répondre à des questions spécifiques qu'on a envoyées. On va examiner les réponses afin de réaliser notre proposition sur un nouvel encadrement temporaire et comprendre les prioritaires dans les mesures pour soutenir les États membres dans cette situation. La vice-présidente exécutive demain sera aux ECOFIN, oui, pour présenter la proposition qu'on a envoyée en consultation aux États membres jeudi. Quand on va adopter le cadre temporaire, si on va adopter le cadre temporaire aussi, parce que l'avoir, c'est aussi un élément de la consultation, on va clairement faire une annonce publique, mais comme je dis, on est encore en phase de consultation avec les États membres.
Voilà. Virginie, je vois qu'il y a une question de suivi.
Je ne te demandais pas des dates précises, mais par exemple, un exemple très concret. Si la Commission veut faire une proposition pour réduire la dépendance des Européens de 2 tiers, au gaz russe d'ici à la fin de l'année, je veux dire, elle ne va pas faire sa proposition fin mai ou en juin, j'en sais rien. Enfin, il faut aller relativement vite, puisque la fin de l'année, en sachant qu'après, il faut que ce soit agréé par les États membres et tout, donc c'est quand même un process compliqué qui prend un peu de temps. Donc, est-ce que cette proposition-là de la Commission, par exemple, on peut s'attendre à la voir avant le Conseil de fin mars, du 24 et 25 mars?
Virginie, je pense qu'il y a une incompréhension, mais je regarde où est Tim. Il est connecté, d'accord. La proposition a déjà adopté une communication sur comment arriver à réduire de 2 tiers notre dépendance par rapport au gaz russe d'ici la fin de l'année. Il ne s'agit pas de faire une proposition législative. La présidente, je crois, l'a rappelé pendant la session de questions-réponses à la fin du sommet de Versailles la semaine dernière. Il ne s'agit pas de dire nous allons fixer une obligation juridique aux États membres ou à l'Union européenne d'avoir réduit de 2 tiers notre consommation de gaz russe et de gaz de pétrole, etc. D'ici la fin de l'année. C'est un plan qui vise à pousser toutes nos actions afin de développer des alternatives à cette source d'approvisionnement russe. Et ce plan, tu le retrouves à la page 5, si je me souviens bien, de la communication. Il y a un tableau qui montre quelles sont les différentes mesures pour ce faire, et que le vice-président Timmermans et la commissaire Kadri Simpson ont mentionné pendant leur conférence de presse. Tim, do you want to add something on this?
Thanks, Eric. No, really nothing to add. I think the president is very clear in her her opening remarks of the closing press conference in Versailles, and she sets out the time frame for the different follow-up actions that we have on pricing, on gas storage, on detailing in a little bit more the Repower EU plan. So yeah, I would just refer to exactly what she said there in Versailles.
Virginie, nous n'avons toujours pas réussi à te convaincre, je vois. Alors, un dernier follow-up. On ne t'entend pas. Non. Je ne sais pas ce qui se passe. Nous avons un problème avec ton système. Écoute, je propose que nous continuions en bilatéral avec Tim. Oui.
Question on the war in Ukraine. The NATO Secretary General warned that Russia may use chemical weapons in Ukraine. And I would like to ask you whether you have an assessment, also the Commission, on this, and whether there are any measures that you could take in case of such an outcome to deal with the situation. Thanks.
Peter. Or is it Peter or is it Nabila? Nabila? Peter? They're fighting for the chance of giving an answer to this. Good to see.
Thank you for the question. First of all, we don't want to see this escalation, because that would be something very, very bad if chemical weapons would be used. We already received indications about the possible orchestration of a possible either chemical or biological attack by Russian occupation forces in Ukraine. The indications are stemming from the fact that the Russian official places are trying to spread around the notion of so-called biochemical laboratories and similar nonsense, which is totally not true and has absolutely doubtful credibility and has been debunked by both the American and Ukrainian governments. But this is not something that we would want to see, the use of chemical weapons, of course. The European Union is prepared for any scenario and also to react to any scenario. But again, let's not speculate and let's focus all the efforts which are ongoing on stopping the aggression against Ukrainian people and against Ukraine as a country, withdrawal of Russian forces, and finding a solution to this crisis in a negotiated political and diplomatic track, not by use of force, use of weapons, and actually forbidden weapons. Because what we have until now is a reckless behavior by Russian troops on Ukrainian territory, not only by targeting civilian infrastructure and civilians, but also targeting nuclear facilities. This is very dangerous, and the international community, of course, has to react to it and make everything possible to stop the Russian occupation machine from embarking on further attacks, including using forbidden and prohibited weapons.
Thank you. Follow-up.
Actually, it's not a follow-up. It's a question on another tone.
But sorry, that's not how it works. I'm sorry. Either you ask a follow-up or I give the floor to people to ask questions. All right? So please hold on, because I'll come back to you afterwards, okay? Thank you very much. I come back to Oliver Grimm, who had a question related to what Virginie had asked before. Oliver.
Going to be easier. On your proposal from, I hope you hear me. On your proposal from last week ago, I just spoke to the Austrian finance minister this morning, and we asked him about this, and he said, quote, "This doesn't look very realistic for Austria, this reduction target." And he also said that the Austrian prime minister spoke with President von der Leyen in Versailles, and he told her, "You have to tell us more concretely what this is going to mean for each member state." So he said that this is basically unrealistic for Austria to achieve, which is a country that's very dependent on Russian gas. So my question to you is, where did you come up with these figures? Did you simply extrapolate them from papers you already had around? Did you consult with member states? And more precisely, did you take into account that certain member states do not import any Russian gas at all, or almost none, whereas others are very, very dependent on it? So there's actually a very uneven burden of reducing its dependence on Russian gas. And basically, again, and Virginie made her point quite clear, what is the follow-up by the Commission? Do you just throw out an action plan, and let's see whether it sticks on the wall or not? Are you going to follow up with something? Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps the first thing to say, and then I'll pass the floor to Tim, is that obviously, and you're right to point this out, saying that we want to reduce by 2/3 consumption, or rather our dependence on Russian fossil fuels, is an average for the EU. It would be absurd to request the same thing from Portugal as it is from Austria. So if you look at the table which was in the communication, it's the dependence of the European Union overall. So obviously, yes, it means that certain member states can do more and should do more in a way in order to reduce this dependence than those who don't have any or have very, very limited dependency on Russia. That's a very, very obvious fact that I am stating there. And I pass the floor again to Tim for more detail.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I mean, I think there's various levels to this. I mean, as you say, first of all, we presented the plans last week, and we got the reactions from the leaders, and the Versailles Declaration indeed asks the Commission to continue work on the REPowerEU plan. I mean, as the President says, by mid-May, we will come up with a proposal to phase out our dependency on Russian gas, oil and coal by 2027, backed by the necessary national and European resources. So that's one dimension to it. We've also said that we will be coming up with legislative proposals on gas storage. And then I think it's also worth looking at the work which is already ongoing. I mean, we have been working for several months on the LNG channel in particular, and replacing Russian pipeline gas imports by LNG, and we've had record LNG imports already in January and February, and we continue to talk to and to work with all of our international partners to make sure that we keep up that higher level of LNG flows, and that's a significant chunk of the imports that we're planning to be able to replace by next year. And then we're talking about front loading and speeding up a number of investments and deployment of things like energy efficiency measures, of renewables projects. So there's a whole bunch of things which we have. I mean, it's the Repower EU plan has various dimensions, and we're now working on the concrete implementation of those, and that's something which happens, with the member states, and it's something which, as the President has said, we will come back to, and we will come out with more details in the coming months. But it's a process. I think I said this last week. We're in an exceptional situation, and that requires us to take exceptional measures. And I think the European Union has shown that it can do many things faster than many people anticipated in the last few weeks. And I think that's as well the spirit in which we approach this plan. Thank you.
So in a way, if you wish, it's not a question now of coming up with detailed proposals at the level of the Commission on what it is that each and every member state has to do in a sort of formal plan. It's working on a day-to-day basis with the member states and at European level also with our international partners in order to achieve the reductions which have been set out in the table of this communication on the different strands. Does not exclude that for one or the other of those areas we may need to come up with more structured thinking, but it's a day-to-day work that now needs to take place. Okay, now I will come back to your question.
Thanks. Well, it's a country-specific question. Whether you have followed in any way the meeting of the Greek Prime Minister with the Turkish President yesterday, and whether you have an assessment there. Thank you.
Peter?
Of course, we are following all these meetings because it is important in the framework of the ongoing normalization of the relations between the European Union and Turkey and its member states of the European Union and Turkey. So we can only encourage such meetings because only in meetings and in mutual engagement you can solve the open issues. So we take note of this meeting and we hope that the trend of the normalization of the relations will continue.
Thank you. Sandor.
Thanks, Eric. It's another country-specific question, and it's on competition. So, since last Thursday, we have a new legislation in force in Hungary regarding fuel prices, and it says that trucks registered in Hungary will have a different price than trucks registered elsewhere. And I was wondering, is it according to the rules of the single market or not? Can we make a difference between a truck registered in Hungary or a truck registered in Slovakia or Poland? How is it working? Thanks.
Sorry, in terms of, I missed the beginning of your question, or I didn't understand. In terms of the price paid for petrol? No? Can you repeat, Sandor? Apologies. I was inattentive there for a second.
There is a new regulation regarding petrol and diesel prices from last Thursday. So it's about diesel.
Okay, so whether a truck registered in Hungary can pay a lower price for diesel than a truck registered elsewhere in the European Union. Okay.
Exactly.
So that would be a taxation question. But first of all, I'm not sure that we're very aware of the statement, so we will have to check and come back to you. But as you know, there is a principle of non-discrimination that applies when it comes to the single market. You cannot have differences between consumers based on their nationality. So I think this, as a general principle, is something which is extremely strong in the workings of the single market. But over and above this comment of a general nature, we will look into the specifics and come back to you. Okay, Oliver, you want to come back? I think on the issue again of.
Yes, hi.
I hope you managed to prevent your house from burning down.
Yes, nothing burnt down. Everything is good. I turned down the thermostat already last week, so I'm definitely doing my bit to reduce our dependence. More concretely on your proposal, even if, because a thing I didn't find in your communication, which is an interesting text, is the problem that even if certain member states got rid of their Russian gas, they would still be contractually obliged to pay for it. They have take or pay contracts. This is, for example, the case in Austria. Even if Austria miraculously decided that it would only, use wind and solar and water and whatever power, it would still have to pay for a certain time for the Russian gas it doesn't even consume. So do you take into account in your proposals that you would basically pay member states for these damages, for the gas that they're not consuming, but that they still have to pay for? How do you deal with this problem? That's a very concrete problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Indeed, it's a very concrete question. I'm not sure we can answer that now, but I go to Tim to see if he has any elements on this.
Yeah, as you say, Oliver and Eric, it's a very concrete question that we need to look into, and that will be part of the follow-up. There's really nothing I can say on that at the moment, but of course it's something that we are very much aware of, that you have these contracts, and there's a number of other areas as well that we need to think about. So we are not at all being naive in this. We know there's things that we need to work out, and that's what we're working on.
And more generally, Oliver, and taking due account of the problems that you show, nobody is saying that this is going to be easy. In fact, Executive Vice President Timmermans said it's going to be bloody hard during his press conference in Strasbourg last week. And it is clear that there will be probably many questions, such as the one that you have now raised, that will come up. But what counts, I think, is the strategic direction that we're trying to go in, which is to make sure that we are no longer beholden to Russian fossil fuels as we currently are. I think everybody recognizes that this dependency puts us in a difficult situation, which we need to change as quickly as possible. And that's what we're going to be working on. Of course, it requires the member states to work on this extremely concretely, and it requires us to work with our international partners. It requires member states to show solidarity one with the other, because there are some who are very dependent, others who are not, some who have an easy access to alternatives, others who don't. And therefore, it will require that we all work together in order to reach this objective as quickly as possible. Are we pushing it as too far? The future will tell us, but you know that we try to fix ambitious goals and then to try to get as close to them as possible, or indeed to achieve them, and sometimes to overachieve them. Remember how the situation was at the beginning of the COVID crisis, when we set out on defining a purchasing policy for vaccines across Europe. And look at where we stand today. Was it easy? Definitely not. Was it absolutely necessary in order for us to be able to fight the pandemic effectively? Yes. Did you have many valid questions as to how we were implementing the strategy? Yes. Did we find it easy to implement the strategy? No. But did we actually manage to deliver the billions of doses of vaccines which were necessary to vaccinate now, over 75%, 80% of the population? Yes. And I think this is the mindset that we have now when it comes to our dependency on Russian fossil fuels. There are big differences with the vaccine situation. I'll grant you that without any difficulty. And once again, this will only be achieved if we can do it in partnership, both with the member states, with the energy sector, the private actors in the energy sector, who play an extremely important role in providing the energy that is required to power our societies and our economies, and with our international partners. Do we have all the answers? Definitely not. But this is exactly what we're going to be working on in the coming weeks and months. So I'm sure we'll have many such discussions here at the midday briefing throughout the weeks and months to come. Okay, Mose, I'll come back to you now. Please wait until it's read.
Yes, thank you much, Eric. I take advantage of being here for the first time for a long time in the press room to ask a few more questions. This is much related to the previous question about the import or continued report of natural gas from Russia during the ongoing war invasion. It seems to me it will take quite some time, to reduce the EU's dependence on that import. That's my impression of what you have said. In the meantime, it seems to me that by still importing gas, we are somehow financing the Russian war machine. And that somehow seems to me might offset, let's say, all the other sanctions against Russia. So my question is, that was a small comment, which I suppose I'm allowed to say. Right. No, my question is, we heard from Tim that in the meantime, EU has started to diversify its import of natural gas and liquefied natural gas from other countries, from the United States and from Qatar and so on. My concrete question is, to what extent have that by now, let's say, replaced natural gas from Russia, which I think normally accounts for up to 40% on average of the import of gas to the EU? And the second question is, after all, winter is more or less over by now, so perhaps there's no need for more natural gas for heating, maybe for other purposes in the industry, I don't know. So to what extent has, let's say, the need of natural gas for heating in Europe been reduced by now? And could that, let's say, quicken, the procedure? Because the war, it's not the same as the pandemic, which continued and so on. We know as long as the war continues, it results in a terrible humanitarian disaster and the destruction of the infrastructure, the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine.
I don't see the link with the last bit of your question, but on your two very specific questions, I'll pass the floor to Tim.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so as I understand it, a question on the current volumes of gas imports and then on the needs for heating as we come out of the winter season. So in terms of the volumes, we had record levels of LNG imports, as I pointed out, in January and February. I would have to double-check exactly what percentage we have now for each of the operators, but I do understand that the Russian percentage has fallen quite significantly below that 40%, also because pipeline imports were significantly slowed down, going back for several months now. So that's also something to factor in. In terms of the heating season, as you say, we are approaching the end of the heating season. I see sun outside my window now, and traditionally the heating season is counted until the end of March in terms of the European energy supply. Now, what we're doing is preparing for next winter, and that's why we have the legislative proposals which will be coming in terms of the minimum storage level to be reached by the 1st of October. Some of the measures in the Repower EU plan are indeed about replacing the need for gas in home heating. For example, the installation of heat pumps, replacing the need for gas for power generation. So yeah, the current heating season is, fingers crossed, coming towards an end, and I think that is helpful. But we have our eyes already on next winter and the need to refill before then and to reduce our dependence on gas before then.
Okay, thank you very much. I see no further questions for us today. Yes, I do see another question for us today. Sorry for that. David. David, you have the floor.
Okay, is this working now?
It is, go ahead.
So it's related to oil supply, really. So biofuels. We heard Macron on Friday talk about the food crisis and the necessity of preparing for that. We also have, in terms of biofuels, there was a debate which led to the 2018 regulation on high indirect land use change biofuels. I was wondering, the Commission, one of them is soya, and this relates to the protein deficiency of Europe. I was wondering, when will this delegated act be published by the Commission, and will you now, given all this crisis, will you classify soy as a high indirect land use change biofuels? Thanks.
Right. Tim, is that a question for you?
I think it is a question for me, but it's one I need to double check and come back to Daffy on. And I will also consult with my trade colleagues on that.
We'll come back to you on this, Daffy. Okay, thank you very much. I'm now closing the midday briefing. See you tomorrow.